Rastafari. What's happening, people? Shout out to Mr. Luca with a super chat early. He says, AJ's been in the ring with 10 of 20 of the best from this generation, in my opinion, not including Vlad. Yeah, we'll come on to AJ. We can talk about him. Shout out to Warren Williams. Exactamundo, parliamentary procedure. We'll have plenty of that in here. Gutter Dandy says nobody wants to see Luke Partridge again anyway. Shout out to Rich Franklin, Kieran Malcolm. Hurtgate. We got Jay Skulls. I think that's how you pronounce that name. Gary Rickards. Warts. World of Rob. Francis La19. Okay. He seems like a Partridge fanboy. These Partridge fanboys butthurt about the Partridge name. Isn't that weird? It's only a name, bro. Why are you getting so upset? So he's trolling. Shout out to Encircled. Indeed, you either die of fury or live long enough to see yourself become a partridge. Shout out to Liam in Change. Daniel. Yeah, Daniel says you spelt partridge wrong in the title. Shout out to Steve. Nikita, big up. Kyle in the chat. Jelly Mold. Alv Shield, Mighty Meatball. Pugilist, Jaden. Shout out to G-Man. Ryan Nemus, the Joker. Luke Partridge himself. President Brush. Yes, big up Alexander. Rich Franklin. Kayvon Green. Kayvon Green says, yeah, I don't get the big deal with the name thing. Makes sense he would change his name to sell more tickets. Yeah, it's not a big deal. But the fanboys get upset. These guys were calling Anthony Joshua Femi for all those years. They had no problem doing that. Femi is his middle name. There's no boxing fight from his amateur career that I've seen or pro career where he was announced as Femi. But the Partridge fanboys kept on calling him Femi regardless. When the shoe's on the other foot and we find out some interesting things with regards to his name, Tyson Fury, and it might not actually be Tyson Fury, it might be Luke Fury or possibly even Luke Partridge, they throw a hissy fit. They get all upset, they get bent out of shape. I assume Adam Jones is trolling with that comment. Surely can't be serious. I assume he's trolling. Because Alexander Usyk outlanded Tyson Fury in both fights. Not only overall, but in the majority of rounds he outlanded Tyson Fury. So how anybody can be saying, oh, there's just no way that Alexander Usyk won either fight is laughable. Shout out to Samil, Fight Sport Talk. We'll come on to what Partridge said. Adam Jones says fights aren't won on punch stats, they're won on the eye test. Well, there are two separate punch stat companies in CompuBox and Jabba. Jabba basically do a more comprehensive breakdown of the punch stats. So they incorporate what they call high impact punches, because technically a little flicking right hand from a orthodox fighter would be classed as a power shot. But jabber don't take that as a power shot. They would only classify a high impact punch as something which has high impact. And on their stats for both fights, Alexander Usyk landed more high impact punches. And as far as the eye test, the majority of people think that Usyk won both fights. The first fight, I guess you are a Fury fanboy, you have to explain to me why Shane Fury, after watching the fight again, because obviously he was there ringside, he watched it again later and said that he thought Usyk won. How do you explain the fact that Shane Fury, when he watched it a second time, publicly said that Usyk won the fight? How about that? So, it's time to get a grip. Shout out to Ruz B. Yeah, we're talking about Partridge again. It's a slow news day. What can I say? It's a slow news day. There's nothing much going on in the world of boxing today other than this. Other than Partridge saying he ain't going to fight again. And I'll give you my take on what that was all about. Adam Jones says, if the fights were in the UK, Fury would have got the decision. Oh, okay. So you're saying that the biasness of UK judging would have got Fury over the line. Well, maybe. Yeah, with biased judges that ignore what they actually see. Maybe, yeah. But it wouldn't have given Fury the decision in his brother Shane's eyes, would it? All right, so let's get into it here. Before we do, though, actually, quick plug. I uploaded this film study to my Patreon page about a week ago. Signs of Decline, Usyk versus Dubois 2 film study. I don't just go through the Usyk-Dubois rematch fight footage. I also go back to some previous Usyk fights, at least one previous Usyk fight, and compare his movement in terms of foot movement, head movement, feints, speed, everything. And, match it up to how he looked against Daniel Dubois second time around. Okay, that's on my Patreon page under the boxing tier, the Boxing Brotherhood. All right? Check it out. It's like 47 minutes long. And I put forth my case that despite the fact that Usyk stopped Dubois earlier than he did in the first fight, I am seeing signs of physical decline. I'm not talking about technical decline necessarily, more so athletic decline, physical decline, which is natural for a guy of his age. He's 38, right? But I point certain things out, which he did against Dubois. Again, despite the fact he got Dubois out of there earlier, because Dubois came to him and was more aggressive and was therefore walking onto more shots than he was in the first fight, which allowed Usyk to get him out of there, okay, earlier. And also he downloaded data, he downloaded information first time around, which was stored in his mind. And so he was able to figure Dubois out very quickly because he'd already done it previously, all right? So make sure you check that out on my Patreon page. Signs of Decline, Usyk Dubois 2 film study. Also, we got the Moses Itauma Dillian White fight coming up very shortly. I did a film study on this one as well. This is just under an hour long, where I break down some of the technical things that Moses Itauma does, playing actual video footage of some of his fights, as well as some of Dillian White's fights, and going through the things which, in my view, will lead to Dillian White's demise against Moses Itauma. So that's also on there, as well as many other boxing film studies I've done. There are some live streams which I've had to remove from YouTube or clip large portions of the stream out. Those live streams are uploaded in their full, unedited versions on my Patreon page, right? But this is just showing you the boxing film studies I've done. You get access to all this and loads of other exclusive boxing content on my Patreon page under the boxing tier, the Boxing Brotherhood. No contract, no commitment. You can cancel at any time. Cheap as a cup of coffee, etc., etc. All the links are in the description box below. So, plugs done. Luke Partridge, aka Tyson Fury. In fact, there's a little bit of what's going on here? Let's just adjust that slightly. Yeah, Luke Partridge, aka Tyson Fury. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says White's chance is higher versus Itauma than Dubois versus Usyk. I was giving Dubois maybe like a 40% chance going into the Usyk rematch, which didn't play out, did it? It turned out to be very generous on my part, giving Dubois a 40% chance. Does White have a better chance against the Itauma? I probably agree with you that he does because of his experience and Itauma's inexperience, you know? I'm not expecting... Well, let's just put it this way. My prediction is that Itauma will win the fight inside 7 rounds. Doesn't mean he's going to stop him in the 7th. Inside 7 rounds at some point. And for me, the fight's over as soon as Moses Itauma lands clean. Dillian Whyte might have enough craft and enough guile and enough technical know-how, even though he's not a very athletic heavyweight. He's got 2 left feet, right? He's a plodder. Even with all that being the case, I think he's got enough to keep Moses Itauma on his toes potentially for a couple of rounds and avoid some of the clean connections that Itauma's going to be looking to make. But ultimately, because Dillian Whyte is not an athlete, because he is pushing 40, his technique is going to start to break down. His shape, as people call it, is going to start to break down earlier on in the fight than Itauma's will, in my estimation, excuse me. And as soon as that happens, Dillian Whyte is going to get caught clean and he's going to get knocked out. That's my perspective on it. Now, if Dillian Whyte won, would it be the biggest shock in the world? Hell no, because Moses Itauma is a novice. That's all he is right now. He's a novice. He's a prospect. I can't even say that he's a proper contender yet because he hasn't beaten any proper contenders. So he's a novice. He's a prospect. He's obviously a prodigy. He's very talented. But boxing history is replete with talented fighters who did not fulfill their potential. So it wouldn't be the massive upset of all time, the biggest upset of all time or anything if Dillian Whyte got it done. Or even if Itauma wins but has problems, that wouldn't really shock me. Again, because of the experience that Dillian Whyte has. Dillian Whyte's been in there with fighters who were faster than him before. He fought Joseph Parker back in the days. I mean, from the first round, it was glaring how much faster Joseph Parker was than Dillian Whyte. You guys remember that? Like, the speed disparity was huge in that fight. So, okay, we got the Partridge fanboys coming in. That's right. Salty tears. How salty are those tears, Partridge fanboys? Thank you for the views. It's that Partridge name that's triggered them. Yeah? The previous video I uploaded saying Tyson Fury's real name exposed, that has really triggered them. It's hurt them. Sleepless nights, anxiety attacks over the name Luke Partridge with receipts. But anyway, yeah, so shout out to Danny for the super chat. Big up Ibrahim for the super chat. He says, Hammond is like the right hand man of Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, telling Tyson Fury he's just a man while the fanboys worship him. Shout out to Ibrahim. CJ says Luke Partridge is a disgusting name. All right, so Partridge did this interview sometime over the past couple of days with Sky. And they asked him, when are you coming back? And he said, never. He kind of said it flippantly. You, with Tyson Fury, often don't know how to take his comments. Is it for real? Is it, trolling? Is it just because he feels like stirring the pot a little bit? That's the thing. So, here we've got a quote from that interview. Tyson Fury insists he will never return to boxing when asked about a comeback from retirement. Tyson Fury hinted regularly about a comeback to boxing in recent months, but has said he will never return to the sport. The 36-year-old retired after a rematch defeat to Alexander Usyk. Fury has been linked with a trilogy fight against Usyk or a fight with Anthony Joshua. Now, as flippant as this comment was, or appeared to be from my perspective from Tyson Fury, he said, I got gray in my beard, I'm an old man, I'm never coming back, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Part of me also thinks that this is a negotiation tactic by Partridge because he doesn't want to fight Anthony Joshua, Daniel Dubois, Martin Bakole, Filip Bergovich, Ajit Kabayel, Joseph Parker, name the heavyweight contender. He doesn't want to fight any of these guys if he can help it. He would prefer to leapfrog everybody and get a straight crack at Alexander Usyk. He's made that clear. That's what he would prefer to do. And so, perhaps, again, I'm speculating here, Turki Al-Sheikh has told him, we can't really do that. You're going to have to get in there and beat an AJ or beat somebody in order to allow us to really sell a third Usyk fight to the public. And maybe Fury's saying, nah, I'm not doing that. I'm going to stay retired forever unless you give me what I want. Or maybe it's a thing where he's trying to drive his price up. He's saying, I'm not going to come out of retirement and fight AJ or anybody unless you pay me an obscene amount of money. That's what I suspect this I'm staying retired forever stuff is really all about. It's just a negotiation tactic. I fully expect Luke Partridge to come back. Absolutely 100%. There's not even a doubt in my mind he's going to come back. But what say you? Will Partridge return to the ring? Or is he gone for good this time? Somebody says perhaps he could fight Chisora again. Oh yeah, what a treat. Obviously they were being sarcastic. Encircled says the Partridge stands that act like he deserves respect to the worst. And I always tell the Partridge stands the same thing. If Partridge deserves respect, tell him to give Usyk respect. Because not once has he given Usyk any respect or any credit for beating him twice and giving him his toughest fights of his career. Not once has he... I mean, after the first fight, he said that Usyk was like a local amateur. And that's what it was, like fighting him in the ring. Like boxing a local amateur. He has given Usyk zero respect after either of the fights. Before the fights, okay, you can understand him not really being that respectful because he's trying to get into fight mode, But after the fact, when the guy's done that to you and you're still talking all this rubbish, I mean, the Partridge stands want us to give Fury all this credit, Partridge all this credit, but their guy don't want to give Usyk any credit. And the stands themselves don't want to give Usyk any credit. All they're talking about is, oh, Fury won both fights. No, he didn't win both fights. Explain to me why Shane Fury had his brother Tyson lose in the first fight after he watched it again. If it was this big robbery Why did his own brother, when he watched the fight back, score it in Usyk's favor? Why did two independent punch stat companies both have Usyk outlanding Fury in both fights? And with regards to Jabba, the more advanced punch stat company, they had Usyk outlanding Fury with high impact punches. That's not just punches with the backhand, that's punches that make a big impact. And professional boxing is scored on the basis of which fighter lands the most clean, effective blow, aka the most damaging blows. Usyk clearly landed more damaging blows in both fights than Tyson Fury did, aka Luke Partridge. So get over it. Usyk won fair and square both times. We're not falling for any of the Partridge gaslighting here. We know what we saw. And the punch stats back up what we saw. Shout out to President Brush for the super chat. He says, if not for Riyadh's season, do you think Fury would have avoided Usyk indefinitely? Many forget he avoided him for almost 3 years. The answer is yes. I do think he would have avoided him indefinitely, 100%. I think it would have been similar to Adonis Stevenson when he basically avoided Kovalev. In fact, there was a time when Adonis Stevenson was seemingly willing to fight Kovalev, but it was a very short, small window when he was willing to fight him. Outside of that window, he basically avoided a Kovalev fight and avoided fighting Andre Ward. He was locked away there in Canada, milking the WBC belt against mostly B-level opponents, sometimes C-level opponents. He did that for years and years and years and years and years, you know? So some fighters do this when they've got a nice cushy little situation going for themselves. They're happy to never fight the rival that the public are calling for them to fight. And by the way, I liked Adonis Stevenson stylistically. I was a real big admirer of his style, his punching power, and I grew frustrated with him because he wasn't going to fight Kovalev, you know? Because I always thought his style was great, and if he hit Kovalev with that big left hand, you know, it would have been interesting to see what the effects would have been. Nevertheless, as much as I liked him as a fighter, I couldn't ignore what he was doing. He made himself irrelevant, basically, outside of Canada. But yeah, shout out to President Bush for the super chat. Bigger Ank says, always the WBC involved, it seems, with this ducking. Yes, the WBC are the most duck-friendly sanctioning body, it would appear, when it comes to any fighter that has a decent following, therefore generates sanctioning fees and whatnot. The WBC are happy to put them in the witness protection program. You know, it is crazy. Tony S says, I watched Dwyer's video saying he would give Wilder a chance against Usyk. Views. Well, a prime Wilder always had a chance against anybody because he was a fantastic puncher, but Usyk is so good technically. I think the odds of him getting caught with a big right hand and taken out are relatively slim, in my opinion. I would give Wilder less of a chance against Alexander Usyk than I gave Daniel Dubois, personally, because Wilder just has a straight right hand. He has nothing else. Literally nothing else. Yeah, he's got some speed, right? He's awkward, he can move about. But in terms of skills, he's skilled at landing a straight right hand. That is it. Alexander Usyk is so well-rounded. He's so technically proficient. I don't see him getting caught with that straight right hand. I mean, Artur Szpilka, who couldn't lace Alexander Usyk's boots. I'm talking about a prime Szpilka compared to the current version of Usyk now. Never mind the prime Usyk. He took Deontay Wilder, what was it, 9 rounds? Never mind what the judges' scorecards said. Szpilka was winning that fight. He was blatantly winning that fight. It was bias scoring in favor of Wilder, biased commentary in favor of Wilder. Spilker was winning the fight. Go back and watch it. Clear as day he was winning the fight. And that is a guy who's a southpaw, I guess similar dimensions to Usyk, but not even remotely close to his level of technical competence. I don't see Deontay Wilder, any version of him, beating Alexander Usyk at all. No, I don't see it. I think that's a comfortable fight for Usyk, actually. Mighty Meatball says Partridge would fight AJ for free, but charge £27 pay-per-view to watch him fight Chisora. I think it was actually £28. Shout out to Mighty Meatball. So, all Partridge needs to do at this point, because we know he's going to come back, all he needs to do to make it palatable to the public, to make a third Usyk fight palatable to the public, is actually earn his right to fight for the title again. The belts are going to get fragmented. He might get an opportunity for a vacant belt. That might get him out of this fake retirement against somebody else, depending on who that somebody else is. But in the meantime, and in case that scenario doesn't unfold, he needs to get out there and fight an Anthony Joshua. Why not? It's a big fight. You can't say that there isn't the money in it that Partridge will be interested in. There's still loads of money in it. The Saudis, I'm sure, will be willing to pay top dollar to get Partridge in there against Anthony Joshua. So, and by the way, I keep saying this for the sake of the Partridge fanboys listening. I would pick Partridge over Anthony Joshua right now. But he needs to go in there and fight this guy to settle that score, which has been running really since Anthony Joshua was an amateur when he sparred Partridge. And Partridge said that Anthony Joshua gave him hell, basically, in that sparring session. His words, not mine. His words were that Anthony Joshua beat him up. I didn't say that. He said that in that interview with Steve Bunce all those years ago. So they've had a rivalry going on certainly since AJ turned pro. And look, if they don't fight, will it be a travesty? No, it won't be a travesty, because we now know that neither of these guys was the best heavyweight of their era anyway. But if Fury wants to sell the idea of an Usyk trilogy fight, this fight would be a good place to start. And I suspect this is the fight that Turki Al-Sheikh would like Partridge to have. If not as his first fight back, then certainly his second fight back against Anthony Joshua. If he can get past Anthony Joshua, like I say, if Usyk is still around, it makes that trilogy match a much easier sell. If it's not going to be Anthony Joshua, then he has to be somebody else from the top 10 or top 15 at the very least. So who have we got? There's the Kubrat Pulevs of the world. I certainly don't want to see Partridge fight Kubrat Pulev, which means that Pulev is probably at the top of Partridge's shortlist for comeback opponents if he can't get a street cracker Usyk. Yeah, he's hoping it's going to be somebody like Pulev. Fabio Wardley. Wardley is a very spirited fighter, but lacks the technical skills which you would expect, not having an amateur background. Partridge might entertain that one. You've got Ajit Kabayel, who Partridge was thinking about fighting a few years ago. But now that he's seen how good Kabayel actually is, would he be that interested at this juncture? Joseph Parker is basically a lackey for Partridge, but there was somebody, maybe a couple of people, that turned up in the live chat of a stream that I did, might have been a couple of months ago now, and they were claiming that the friendship between Partridge and Parker isn't quite as close as it used to be. I don't know where they got that information from. Is it just made up nonsense? I've got no idea. But I just want to throw that out there in case anybody's got any information on it. So you wouldn't have thought that fight would be likely. And let's be real here. Let's be fair here. If anybody is to fight Alexander Usyk next, it needs to be in a meritocracy, right? This word is constantly being thrown around now since the Saudis have got involved in boxing. In a meritocracy, the next fight for Alexander Usyk needs to be Ike Ibeabuchi or Joseph Parker. It can't be Partridge. It certainly can't be Joshua. He's dealt with Daniel Dubois, without a shadow of a doubt, convincingly, both times for me, but for those who were still clinging on to the whole, it wasn't a low blow in the first fight narrative, well, what happened in the second fight? So, yeah, it needs to be Ike Ibeabuchi or Joseph Parker fighting Alexander Usyk next. So Partridge needs to go off and fight somebody to earn a title shot. I think he needs to fight and beat 2 people in the top 15 or top 10 to really sell that to me, and I want to say to the majority of the public. So let's get him in there against an AJ. Let's get him in there against even an FA Jagba. That's a winnable fight for Partridge. Jagba's ranked highly with the IBF. Usyk's obviously got he's got all the belts right now. So there's an Jagba out there. There's an Anthony Joshua. You got Filip Hrgovic, of course. You got Martin Bakole. You've got Zheli Zhang still hanging about, although I'd like to see him get a win. But then again, Partridge is coming off 2 losses. Lawrence Okoli, I can't imagine many people will want to see that. You could have a crossroads fight with Dubois, coming off his second defeat to Usyk. There are many options out there, many possibilities out there for Partridge to actually earn a title shot instead of trying to take advantage of this legacy privilege stuff. Unfortunately, the WBC, as we've spoken about earlier on in this stream, are very big when it comes to legacy privilege. And they've stated over the past few weeks that if Partridge wants to come back, he will be immediately installed as #1 contender with the WBC. That's a shocker. And I say shocker not in the sense that it's not expected, because it is expected. The WBC have been doing that for the longest time. It's a shocker in the sense of it's shockingly bad form by the WBC to be doing something like that. It's like when Vitaly Klitschko retired. I think it was for 18 months or 2 years. And he came back out of retirement and the WBC gave him an immediate title shot against Sam Peter. Leapfrogged everybody. Now, that kind of went relatively unchallenged at the time because the heavyweight division was so weak back then. It was so devoid of talent. So when Klitschko leapfrogged everybody, the general view was, well, he might as well leapfrog everybody because nobody else is any good anyway in the heavyweight division right now other than Vladimir. So, yeah, let him leapfrog and fight Sam Peter. At least it'll be a challenge for Peter rather than a knockover job. Obviously, Peter got stopped in that fight. So, yeah, the WBC are known for doing that. And they've made it clear that they intend to do that for Luke Partridge when he ends this fake retirement. The thing is, installing him as #1 contender is not the same as installing him as mandatory challenger. I'm not sure if they're willing to install him as mandatory challenger or not. Perhaps they are. Like I say, I'm not sure. If they're only willing to make him #1 contender, then presumably he would need to fight a final eliminator against somebody, which is exactly what Partridge is trying to avoid. He doesn't want to fight a final eliminator against anybody. He wants a straight crack at Alexander Usyk again. Shout out to George for the super chat. He says, I honestly don't care if Luke returns. It's either fight AJ Parker Dubois and the other youngsters, or just go away for good. Nah. All right. Big up George, the last patriot. I agree. Mark Hatch says the WBA rankings are a joke. Let's have a look at those WBA rankings here. They often are a joke, by the way. And yeah, they're particularly bad here, I have to agree. Because you got Kubrat Pulev regular champion. I mean, how on earth does that happen? Yeah, he fought Manuel Cha for that WBA regular belt. So that's laughable for one. You got Fabio Wardley, interim champion, no issue with that. He fought, he won that interim status. He had that, one-punch win. You got Moses Itauma ranked Michael Hunter ranked number 1. He shouldn't be that high. What's he done to earn that type of ranking? Michael Hunter lately? Nothing. So he shouldn't be that high. Itauma shouldn't be as high as number 2. Lania Perro certainly shouldn't be number 3. Lania Perro is one of the most limited Cubans from what I've seen of him so far, and I've seen quite a bit of him. One of the most limited Cuban heavyweights I've seen for years. Lania Perro. His brother, actually, is it Lania Perro or Dania Perro? I get them mixed up now. One of them is taller. The taller one is the better one. The shorter one is very, very limited. I want to say the shorter one is Lania Perro, but don't quote me. Either way, neither of them should be ranked that highly. Martin Bakole, the fact that he's ranked above F.A. Ibeabuchi, in fact, F.A. Ibeabuchi isn't ranked at all by the WBA. That's interesting. But yeah, Martin Bakole blatantly lost that F.A. Ibeabuchi fight, was gifted a draw. So a number 4 position for him. I mean, I don't agree with it, but it's not the worst thing I've seen in the world. Filip Bergovich, number 5. Jarrell Miller, number 6. He hasn't fought since the Andy Ruiz fight. Nelson Heisa, is he signed to Frank Warren? Where's he from, like Albania or something? He's the most obscure heavyweight, or one of the most obscure heavyweights in the top 15 right now. He's fought nobody, knocked over a bunch of pies. He's got a number 7 ranking. Incredibly, at number 8 is Dave Allen. Dave Allen's got a top 10 ranking with the WBA. After beating Johnny Fisher? Johnny Fisher's an area level fighter. And the WBA have given him a top 10 off the, Dave Allen the top 10 after beating Johnny Fisher. That is a shocker. Then you've got Dania Perro, the other Cuban brother I spoke about. Then you've got an individual with a very long name, which I won't try and pronounce. I've got no idea who he is. Any of you guys know who that guy is, ranked number 10 by the WBA? Never seen him, and I will not attempt that name. Manuel Cha, oh my God. As I go through this WBA top 15, shout out to who it was that said the WBA rankings are a joke. Yeah, it really is a joke. This is shocking. Mark Hatch, yes. Really, really shocking from the WBA, this. Manuel Cha is in there at number 11. Murat Gassiev, Justice Huni at 13. I mean, why is Justice Huni not above, like, damn near all of these guys, other than Fabio Wardley, who obviously beat him and who's interim champion? How is Justice Huni below somebody like Manuel Cha? How's Justice Huni below Dave Allen? Make it make sense. How's he below Nelson Heisa? Yeah, these rankings for the WBA are crazy. Absolutely crazy. And actually, the WBO are maybe not quite as crazy overall as the WBA rankings, but they've got Johnny Fisher at number 15. Why has Johnny Fisher broken the top 15 with the WBO? He got sparked out by Dave Allen in his last fight. Somehow he's in the top 15. And even more curiously, Dave Allen isn't in the top 15 of the WBO at all. Maybe the WBO haven't updated their rankings. I hope that's what it is. They haven't updated their rankings since Johnny Fisher got chinned in that rematch. But yeah, that's a bizarre one to see Johnny Fisher in at number 15. Shout out to Ocean Blue in the chat. He says the insanity of sanctioning bodies. Oh, wow. Tony S. says, Gergen is often called the Timu version of Tyson Fury. When you see him, you'll know why. I'm almost afraid to look now. JR says, get Ibeabuchi in there. Well, Ibeabuchi is supposedly fighting Danny Williams in Nigeria quite soon. Let me just check on BoxRec to see if they've listed it there yet, because Ibeabuchi was scheduled to fight somebody else in Nigeria a couple of months ago, but the plug got pulled on that fight basically at the last minute. I'm not sure why. Let's see if the same happens with the Danny Williams fight or if it does go ahead. Just going to check here if it's listed on BoxRec yet. Not that it being listed on BoxRec necessarily means it's going to go ahead. Okay, so this is weird. The Danny Williams fight is not listed on BoxRec, but there's a different opponent listed on BoxRec for Ike Ibeabuchi, not Danny Williams. So there's somebody called, and it's a fellow Nigerian to, Ike Ibeabuchi's Nigerian. This guy's also Nigerian. Idris Afini is his name, a 40-year-old Nigerian with a record of 18-8. He's got 15 KO wins, and 4 of his 8 defeats were by KO. He's also got 2 draws on his record. So a total of 29 pro bouts. He's only fought, well, actually, I'm looking at his record here. Most of his fights have been in Nigeria, but he's also fought in Ghana, South Africa, and randomly in Russia. He fought in Russia back in 2018 and was knocked out by a guy called Ali Beloyev. Yeah, knocked out in 8 rounds in that fight. Other than that, as I say, all of his fights have been in Africa, in Nigeria, his native country, Ghana, and 1 fight in South Africa. So that's who Ike Ibeabuchi is apparently fighting now. I guess the Danny Williams fight has fallen through. Is Ike Ibeabuchi's dream of returning to the ring never actually going to happen? He's a very determined man, very strong-willed man. He's in his 50s now. I want to say he's about 52. Let's get his... It doesn't actually say his age or birth date on BoxRec, so I'll get his Wikipedia up. Yeah, he is 52. Bang on. 52 years of age. His last professional bout was in March of 1999. This is somebody who many people will give as an example of a wasted talent, maybe the biggest wasted talent in the opinion of some people of all time in the heavyweight division. He was on an upward trajectory, a steep upward trajectory in the late 90s, after beating David Tua, who was unbeaten at the time, who was a hot prospect, hot contender in the heavyweight division. Ibeabuchi was supposed to be the last test for Tua before a title shot. And Ibeabuchi upset the apple cart. He came in and he had an absolute war with David Tua. It was a fantastic fight. There were no knockdowns. Both guys showed themselves to have iron jaws in that fight. Both guys are landing hellacious punches. But Ibeabuchi's extra versatility really won him the fight, because although he did bang it out with Tua on the inside for large portions of the fight, he was also able to get up on his toes, being the taller man, around 6'2", 6'2.5". David Tua being about 5'9". Ibeabuchi was able to get up on his toes, pop a jab, and win some of the slower rounds that way. So, yeah, it was a fantastic fight. And that fight broke the record at the time for most punches thrown between 2 heavyweights in a 12-round bout since the start of the existence of CompuBox. That record, I think, was broken by, God, who was it now? Chris Arreola, when he fought maybe Kaunaki, broke the record. But trust me when I tell you that Ike Ibeabuchi versus David Tua was a much better fight than Chris Arreola versus Kaunaki. Okay? Two much better fighters and throwing and landing much more high-quality punches. So, yeah, that's Ike Ibeabuchi. After the David Tua fight, he knocked over a couple of C-level opponents before eventually knocking over Chris Bird in 5 rounds, which was a very good win. Bear in mind, this is the same Chris Bird that beat Vitaly Klitschko, all right? Beat Evander Holyfield, obviously a faded version of Holyfield, etc., etc. Now, when I say he beat Vitaly Klitschko, he was behind on points, but he was hanging in there. Klitschko dislocated his shoulder and quit on his stool, which got him heavily criticized by the American media, the boxing media. They really went in on him because they said, how could you quit in a fight which you were clearly winning and there was only about 2 or 3 rounds to go? You were in there against a non-puncher and you decided to pull out the fight. So there was kind of a question mark over Vitaly Klitschko because of that. And that's one of the reasons that Vitaly Klitschko fought so hard against Lennox Lewis and was so eager to prove himself after that, because he did have all these question marks about his heart following the Chris Bird defeat. But anyway, Ibeabuchi went in there. There was no long fight. There was no getting even close to a points decision. He took Chris Bird out in the 5th. He hit him with an uppercut from hell, which sent slob flying out of Chris Bird's mouth. And when he got to his feet, he was all over the place. Drool hanging out of his mouth, wobbling all over the place. Yeah. So Ike Ibeabuchi was very talented. He was very powerful, big, strong, muscular guy, hand speed, punching power, good chin, good stamina, threw loads of shots. There was a lot of potential there. But he appeared to be one of these talented but extremely mentally and emotionally flawed individuals because he went off the rails in his personal life. Now, some people claim that the erratic behavior of Ibeabuchi was triggered by maybe CTE or trauma that he, head trauma that he incurred in the David Tua fight. There are people that say that after that fight, he started acting really erratic. But as I understand it, he was acting erratic behind the scenes even before then. Is it possible that CTE or the Tua fight pushed him over the edge? Maybe. So he was a very erratic individual. He was once at a dinner meeting with television executives and all sorts of boxing people. And people kept calling him Ike, when they were addressing him. And he apparently stood up and got really angry with people calling him Ike. And he slammed a steak knife into the table and said, "You call me the president. You call me the," because that was his boxing nickname, the president. He said, you call me the president. And he got really irate with his knife in his hand and he had to be calmed down. This is in front of all the execs. He's saying, "You call me the president. You don't call me Ike." Then there was a sparring incident with, what's the guy's name now? Ezra Sellers, excuse me. It was a very hard punch in southpaw. And Ezra Sellers was apparently giving Ibeabuchi some trouble in sparring. And after the spar, when Sellers was in the locker room, getting himself, whatever, maybe he just showered or whatever the case may be. And in fact, it would have been before he'd showered because he was taking his wraps off. Or maybe he'd taken his wraps off. I forget exactly the way the story went. But anyway, Ibeabuchi followed Ezra Sellers into the locker room. And he saw on Ezra Sellers' hand was a ring. And Ibeabuchi was adamant that Sellers had worn that ring during the spar so that, it could cause extra damage through the glove. Sellers said that's not the case. He only just put it on now, in the locker room. And Ibeabuchi jumped on him, literally, tackled him to the ground and was on top of him trying to strangle him. And Ibeabuchi had to be prized off of Ezra Sellers, apparently to save Ezra Sellers from being strangled to death. So there was that incident. And then there was some other stuff which you got convicted of, which I won't speak about here for the sake of the algorithm, which is, pretty serious stuff. And that's Ibeabuchi. So he was sent to the big house for like best part of 20 years. I think he was briefly released maybe 6 or 7 years ago, but maybe there was a parole violation or something like that which put him back in, and he was finally released for good a couple of years ago and then deported back to Nigeria because he was doing his sentence in the United States. That's where the crimes were committed. So that's the president, Ike Ibeabuchi, a crazy character. And he has a YouTube channel now where he posts regularly. He's still a physical specimen at the age of 52. I mean, he's just built like an absolute tank. Man's got muscles on his muscles at the age of 52. It's remarkable. He's still got that kind of physique at his age. But he appears to me, from watching his videos, to still be crazy. And yeah, you maybe expect that if he was crazy going into prison, after spending 25 years in there, you wouldn't think he's going to be any more sane when he comes out. And like I say, from the videos I've seen of his, he doesn't seem any more sane. Shout out to Dan the Man for the super chat. He says, who have you got? Prime Breeders versus Prime Povetkin. I got Prime Povetkin in that fight. It's a good fight, but when Povetkin was on that run following the loss to Vladimir Klitschko, he was really quite formidable. So I'm going to go with Prime Povetkin. Maybe on points, Breeders has got the stamina advantage over Povetkin, but Prime Povetkin's stamina was a bit better than the previous versions and later versions of Povetkin that we saw. How much of that was down to the PEDs? Who knows, but we'll take Prime Povetkin for what he was. Shout out to Mr. Luca for the super chat. He says, why is Dubois only ranked in one governing body? Probably because the governing bodies most of the governing bodies haven't updated their rankings since that Usyk rematch. Because when you're a champion, you're not ranked by the other governing bodies. You're only going to be placed as champion within your governing body. You won't appear in the rankings of the other governing bodies as a contender because you're a champion. So that's probably why. So they haven't updated their rankings. And incidentally, the one that has updated their rankings, where have they got him now? Let me see. Which one is it? It's not the... Yes, it is the WBO. He's a Frank Warren fighter, so it's not really surprising the WBO have got him ranked at number 5. So I guess they've updated their rankings. But if they have updated their rankings, again, why is Johnny Fisher in at number 15? Yeah, they must have updated their rankings. Because Dubois wouldn't be in the WBO rankings at all if they hadn't updated them. Because he was IBF champion. So yeah, what on earth is Johnny Fisher doing at number 15 with the WBO? That is bizarre. He's coming off a knockout defeat to Dave Allen. I mean, if you wanted to put anyone in at number 15, and I wouldn't agree with this either, but surely it'd have to be Dave Allen, not Johnny Fisher. So that needs explaining to me. Yeah, that needs explaining to me. Shout out to Paul McAllister for the super chat. He says, you ever watch Tommy the Duke Morrison? Thoughts? Yes. I watched Tommy Morrison throughout most of his professional career. What did I think of him? He was a very gutsy fighter. He was a big puncher, particularly with the left hook. He wasn't very defensively blessed. And after the Ray Mercer fight, where he got brutally knocked out, in a fight which should have been stopped earlier, the referee let him take way too many punches, his punch resistance notably deteriorated after that Ray Mercer fight. Because prior to the Mercer fight, I'm not saying he had a great chin, but he appeared to be able to take shots better before that Mercer. But the Mercer fight really, I think, damaged his punch resistance. And after that, he was getting knocked down by innocuous-looking shots from various different fighters. An ancient Carl Williams dropped him. He was obviously knocked out in one round by Michael Bent. The Michael Bent fight was supposed to be a tune-up fight. for a unification with Lennox Lewis. But that went out the window. Michael Bentt, as I say, knocked him out in the first round. So he was a gutsy fighter. He had that great, he had a lot of great slugfests, Tommy Morrison. The Ray Mercer fight was a good fight until he got stopped. He had a vicious slugfest with a Native American heavyweight, the only Native American heavyweight that I can think of, actually, called Joe Hip. He was a southpaw Native American heavyweight called Joe Hip. That was a hell of a war. Joe Hip actually broke Morrison's jaw in that fight. But Morrison came out on top in the end. Joe Hip's whole face, because Joe Hip's face used to swell up something terrible, kind of like Ruslan Provodnikov. You guys remember Ruslan Provodnikov, the 140-pound champion? His face always used to swell. He had one of them kind of round faces that would get puffy real quick. That's how Joe Hip was, the Native American heavyweight Joe Hip, who was like a fringe contender in the 90s. And his whole face swelled up like a flipping basketball against Tommy Morrison. What other fights? Obviously, Morrison had a fight with Lennox Lewis towards the back end of his career proper, which was a pretty one-sided affair. I think Lewis stopped him in like the 5th. But prior to that, Morrison had another brutal slugfest with Razor Ruddock. Both guys were renowned for their left hooks. Morrison was down in the fight, but ultimately he came back to deck Razor Ruddock with one of the best left hooks you will ever see in a heavyweight ring. I mean, it landed so flush and Razor Ruddock went down so heavy. It is amazing that he got up at all. Never mind got up at the count of 3 or 4. The way Razor Ruddock went down, the way his head bounced off the canvas, you would have thought that guy's never getting up. You can count to 60. He's not getting up. He literally gets up somehow at like 3 or 4. It is the most extreme example of a heavy knockdown which somebody recovers quickly from. Incredible. So go check that fight out. That's on YouTube. Yeah, very entertaining career overall, Tommy Morrison. Although, it has to be said, he admitted after he came back, because after the Lennox Lewis fight, he tested positive for HIV, right? And he was away from boxing for a while. When he came back, he claimed he was HIV-free. He said that it was a false positive because he'd been doing roids his whole boxing career. And he said doing the roids is known to give false positive. This is what he was claiming. Yeah? And he admitted he'd been doing roids his entire professional career. He said that if he hadn't been doing roids, he would have been a cruiserweight. So we do have to put that out there. Shout out to Paul McAllister for the super chat. Shout out to Tony Britton for the super chat. No message there, just a super chat, much appreciated. Shout out to Ben Odom. Yep, he's talking about the roids. And yeah, Tommy Morrison was one of the opponents which they considered for Mike Tyson's first comeback bout following his prison sentence for that Desiree Washington thing. They eventually decided against fighting Morrison and took on a less capable fighter in Peter McNeely. I mean, I think Mike Tyson would have beat Tommy Morrison anyway, in my personal opinion. But McNeely was a softer touch. They weren't sure where Mike was at after 3.5 years in prison. They wanted to err on the side of caution, so they picked McNeely rather than Tommy Morrison. And Morrison was very upset about that because he thought he was going to get the fight. Oh, wow. The Joker says, Ibeabuchi posted some sparring footage with Ajagba last week. Ajagba hit him with a half-hearted right hand, and Ibeabuchi's legs were all over the place. 52 is too old, man. It certainly is too old. It certainly is too old. I'm going to have to go watch that sparring footage now, but I can well believe it. Because Ibeabuchi won't have been, getting hit properly for, like I say, 25 years. And he's 52 now, so... Ezekiel says, what's everyone saying on Dave Allen title shot by 2026? It's possible if the belts get fragmented and Dave Allen keeps winning. If he beats Arslanbek Makhmudov, then a title shot for a vacant belt for Dave Allen is not out of the question. As crazy as it sounds, it's not out of the question. But in my opinion, it's dependent on the belts getting scattered. Shout out to Bobs for the super chat. He says, Lomachenko hasn't been at an Usyk fight since AJ2. I theorize he rolls with Russian Orthodox, but Usyk rolls... okay. I theorize he rolls with Russian Orthodox, but Ukrainian Orthodox for Usyk. Okay. Turkey, bad for boxing long term, in my opinion. As far as the Lomachenko-Usyk thing, I haven't noticed, so I couldn't really comment on that. Turkey bad for boxing long term. I don't know. Why would you say he's bad for boxing long term? He's certainly been great for boxing in the short term in terms of getting fights made. We don't like the number of pay-per-views that DAZN have been putting on at all, because it's not just for these super fights at this stage, is it? I know Turkey says he's abolishing pay-per-views for Riyadh season and Ring Magazine shows, but is that just a roundabout way of indicating that there are going to be less Riyadh season and Ring Magazine shows moving forward? Because Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren are still going to do pay-per-views. So we won't necessarily get much less pay-per-views on DAZN than we've been getting up to this point. It's just that there won't be any Riyadh season or Ring Magazine pay-per-views. Whenever they do shows, it'll be part of the DAZN subscription cost. But the subscription cost is going to go up if you want to access those. So it's almost like, a backdoor way of just doing pay-per-view. Maybe a slightly more cost-effective way, but that would depend on how many Riyadh season and Ring Magazine shows they do per year and what the quality of those shows is. But short term, for 18 months, whatever, Turkey's been in the game. Overall, he's been good for the game, because there are many fights that simply would not have happened if he wasn't involved. I think we can pretty much all agree on that. But moving forward, they don't seem like they want to spend as much money. They do intend to make their money back and actually make a profit. Whether they actually can or not remains to be seen, but Turkey has said this explicitly in an interview over the past month or so on the Ring Magazine YouTube channel. He said, we want to make our money back several times in that interview. So with that being the case, maybe it's possible things won't be as good moving forward with Turkey Al-Sheikh. We shall see. Time will tell. But shout out to Bobs for the super chat. Mr. Lucas says, I think they said they would do a show a month, as in Riyadh season or Ring Magazine, but what will the quality of those shows be? To answer your question there, Paul McAllister, regarding which fighters really helped to legitimize the WBO belt, I'd really say it was the Klitschko's. Yeah, I'd say it was the Klitschko's, because the 3-belt era ran up until Lennox Lewis retired in the early 2000s after he beat Vitaly Klitschko, because Lewis had 3 belts and was considered undisputed. I mean, I think he might have had the IBO, but nobody cared about the IBO. People still don't care about the IBO now. So let's just talk about the 3 major belts, WBC, WBA, and IBF. He was considered undisputed with 3 belts in the early 2000s, despite the fact that the WBO had existed for at least a decade at that point. When Lewis retired and the Klitschko's took over, that is when the WBO, like I say, really became seen as one of the main belts, and it became the 4-belt era. So I would say the Klitschko's, or Vladimir specifically, I think they both held it at one point, but Vladimir held it for longer, whereas Vitaly held onto the WBC strap. So I'd say Vladimir Klitschko. Mr. Lucas says, I think they'll do good cards still. Just do Ring Pass. I hope so. And equally, if not more important, DAZN need to fix up when it comes to their cancellation policy, because their cancellation policy is straight up foul. It's a foul policy where they make people jump through hoops to cancel their DAZN subscription. It should never be that difficult. It should be as simple as canceling a Netflix subscription, which is easy as pie. You literally click one button. There's no funny business. There's no being put through to a chat or having to call up a number and speak to anybody. No. You click a button on Netflix and they say, okay, they might, have a little exit survey. Why are you quitting? Whatever. You don't even have to answer it, I don't think. And that's it. It's ended. Quick and easy. A couple of seconds. That's how the DAZN cancellation should be. And I will not sign back up to DAZN until they fix it so that cancellation is that easy. Some people are saying, hey man, just call your bank and tell them to cut off the debit payment. Well, bear in mind, I do live abroad. So it's international phone calls and stuff like that to the bank. I mean, I'm sure I can do it, but it gets a bit techers when you're overseas. You have to call a different number. And Anthony YouTube says you have to cancel using a desktop. But even using a desktop, they still try to put you through to a chat, a person on the chat, or call a number or some nonsense. Last I checked anyway. Ace says Eubank made the WBO important. Not really. In the UK, the WBO was seen as, I don't know. The WBO was like a sanctioning body that had some merit among UK boxing fans because of the fact that Eubank had it and Herbie Hyde had it and what have you, and Frank Warren was doing so many shows with WBO title fights. But outside of the UK, nobody, for the most, certainly in America, they didn't count the WBO. It was seen as a joke belt. During the whole Eubank era, the WBO was not recognized in America, and America was back then the center of professional boxing. It's not like now where it's far more diversified. Back then, it was all about America, basically, when it comes to world championship level boxing. Obviously, Britain had certain fighters, but the majority of stuff was going on in the States, and nobody took the WBO seriously back then. Ben Odom says, Revolut account, you can block their payments with one click. Sean McNally says, I just cancelled my card when I wanted to cancel the zone. Okay, extreme measures. Shout out to LD Phoenix. Okay, a bizarre comment from Michael Merck. He says, is Hatman British or American? I've been watching his channel for years now, and I still don't know. Yeah, that is a really bizarre comment. That's bizarre. I can only surmise that English is not your first language. Chief Wiggum says, another Nigerian boxer, Sam Peters, great fight, beat Tony something Holyfield couldn't do. Sam Peter beat Tony something. Who did Sam Peter fought somebody called Tony? Sam Peter got beat up by both Klitschko's. I mean, the first Vladimir Klitschko fight for Sam Peter was competitive. He dropped Klitschko a few times. But other than that, what did Sam Peter actually do? He beat, God, who did Sam Peter actually beat? Jeremy Williams? I forget who else he beat now. James Toney, of course, yeah, he fought James Toney. Yeah, he did beat James Toney. Okay, Michael Merckx is from the Ukraine, I see. Yeah, for people who are not from the Anglosphere, they will sometimes hear my accent and think it's American, but people who are American will never say that I sound American. They'll say, no, you sound like you're from the UK. That's not an American accent at all. And the same for people from the UK. They can tell it's a UK, London accent. But people from outside of the Anglosphere who don't speak English as their first language, to them, apparently it sounds similar to an American accent. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, whose bars are these? 10 years younger, Rich Albania, I'll leave you out in the rain and the thunder. Okay, you switched up the name Wiley for Rich, because those bars are Devlin's bars. That's a great diss track when he was going at Wiley. 10 years younger, Wiley Albania, I'll leave you out in the rain and the thunder. Kids, watch your back, because Wiley will bum you. That's the next line. I'm just quoting a line from Devlin. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. Yeah, I do like the whose bars are these game. Shout out to Matthew Wilson. He says, does the IBO, have mandatory challenges in a ranking system? The IBO is so irrelevant. I don't really keep up with what they do. But correct me if I'm wrong, anybody in the chat. Wasn't Chris Eubank Jr. mandatory for that Australian guy who he won the IBO title from? Reynold Quinlan. I think Eubank Jr. might have been mandatory for Quinlan. But you never hear of IBO mandatories being called or anything like that, so I really don't know. Perhaps because nobody cares, they don't do that many mandatories, would be my best guess. So shout out to Matthew Wilson and much appreciated for the super chat. And Circle says the IBO don't have rankings or a mandatory process unless they randomly decide to. Yeah, that's what it appears to be. Let's switch up these visuals. Encircled says, I wonder what Bacoli will weigh for his next fight. Well, he was admonished by Derek Chisora recently over still looking overweight. LUFC says, Hatman, why would you listen to music with such strange bars? It was a battle. It was a grind battle. You know, people drop disrespectful bars and call each other nonces and all that kind of stuff. Because Wiley basically was accused of being a nonce many, many times by many other like grime MCs. And that's what Devlin was alluding to with that particular bar. So it was a battle, you know, you listen to these battles. Yeah, Bacoli is apparently a vegetarian, which really makes you wonder what on earth he's eating. They say he eats a lot of fufu. Okay. I can't imagine it's just a load of fufu. Maybe a load of chips as well. Maybe like mountains and mountains and mountains of chips. Maybe fried Mars bars, because they still serve that stuff, as I understand it, over in Scotland. Fried Mars bars and fried Cadbury's cream eggs and all that type of stuff. I reckon Bacoli's probably scoffing a lot of that down as well. Iron brew, you know? Yeah, Warren Williams is mentioning Scottish beer there. Yeah, probably that too. Kitagata says a bit of haggis. Roz B says, don't you know Bacoli is married? African living in Scotland, he's doomed. Well, yeah, a married African man generally develops a big pot belly. And combine that with living in Scotland, where, you know, the Scottish diet isn't, I'm not talking about, you know, traditional Scottish food. I mean, what the average Scot is eating is different than traditional Scottish food. And, yeah, when you combine those two things, a married African man living in Scotland, it's a bad combination, isn't it? When it comes to health. Mr. Lucas says, Iron Brew is classic. Don't disrespect my national drink. I ain't disrespecting it, bro. I'm just saying, if Bacoli's drinking that like it's water. Oh, okay. He's talking to Ace. He says Iron Brew is awful. I like Iron Brew. And yeah, especially when they used to sell it in the glass bottles. I don't think they do that anymore. But the Iron Brew in the glass bottles back in the 90s, what? It does have an unusual taste, but I always liked it. Paul McAllister says, I thought Bacoli moved to Dubai to dodge tax. No, you're thinking of Lawrence Okoli, not Martin Bacoli. Lawrence Okoli, the former cruiserweight champion. He's the one that moved to Dubai to avoid the tax like everybody else, and you can't blame him. You know what I mean? Make yourself a resident in a Middle Eastern country, and then you don't have to pay these obscene taxes, which are obscene. Shout out to the Sweet Master for the super chat. He says, will Dr. Mike Uden go down as a hero? In my book, yeah. Hell yeah. In my book. How about you? Shout out to the Sweet Math for the super chat. Okay, Kitagata says, who likes sushi though? Never tried sushi. W says, Okoli was back to his boring ways against Lorena. I didn't think it was that bad a fight, to be honest. I mean, he did have an injured bicep, his left bicep. It wasn't an exciting fight by any means, but it was nowhere near as horrible as the Billum Smith fight or the Matty Yaskin fight or the Isaac Chamberlain fight. There wasn't as much clinching in the Lorena fight as there was in the fights I just mentioned. Far less. So I didn't think it was that bad. Again, I wouldn't want to watch the fight again, but it wasn't the worst thing I've seen. Shout out to Agni for the super chat. Big up. No a comment on that super chat, just a super chat. So much appreciated to you, sir. Exactamundo says he likes sushi, rice and fish. Bosh. W says Lorena was there to survive, I felt. I agree. Lorena really didn't try. He was intimidated by the power of the right hand. And that allowed Okoli to just control things on the outside. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, Laura Branigan, Self-Control, best 80s song? No. There are so many great songs from the 80s. I certainly can't put that as the number one. So many great songs. I couldn't even tell you what my favorite song is from the 80s because there's just too many. To list a couple off the top of my head, I mean, there were Michael Jackson songs that came out, right? Billie Jean came out in the 80s and Thriller and all that and many others. Lionel Richie, Dancing on the Ceiling, Hello. Shaka Khan, Ain't No But. I mean, there's just so many songs. So many. Rock was still a big genre back then. You know, there were like great rock songs that came out in the 80s. So there were too many great songs in the 1980s to pick one and say this was the best. Shout out to Agni again for the super chat. He says, who do you think is funnier, Hay or Partridge? Definitely Hay. There was a time when Partridge was funny, but it didn't last very long. David Hay was funnier for longer, so I definitely have to say Hay. Shout out to Paul McAllister. He says, you ever watch The Contender, good TV or cringe? It was good TV, in my opinion. The only cringe bit was Stallone giving professional boxers advice about boxing. That was weird. It was as if Stallone was so lost in his Rocky character that he forgot that he was acting and never actually had a career as a professional boxer and was never heavyweight champion. That was cringe. Yeah? When Stallone with these weird, I think they only did that for season 1, where Stallone was like giving all this advice. I'm like, how's Stallone going to advise professional boxers? He'd never had any kind of fight, amateur or pro, in his whole life. And he was literally standing in front of him like some kind of guru. It was weird. Trolls Are Bad says, sugar tax ruined the taste of many fizzy drinks. I 100% agree. Fizzy drinks taste better with real sugar, not artificial sweeteners. Artificial sweeteners taste like plastic. It's disgusting. And there are some drinks that have, part sugar and part artificial sweetener, and you can still taste it. It's nasty. So, yeah, I always check if I ever have fizzy drinks on the ingredients to make sure there's no artificial sweeteners in there. Because them artificial sweeteners taste disgusting. All right, so Fernie G says, does the UK hold Slick Rick in high regard? I always wondered since he is from there. I would say not really, because for one, Slick Rick is, his heyday was like in the late 80s, early 90s. And not that many people in the UK really know about Slick Rick like that. Like, obviously some hip-hop aficionados and hip-hop old school heads know about him from back in the days, and they hold him in high regard. But the vast majority of the public are not really familiar with Slick Rick, because obviously most of his career was in the United States. So, yeah, that's what I would say about Slick Rick. Indeed, as Evil Uncle Phil said there, he's not really even seen as a UK artist, because he was based in America most of his life. And even though he's got kind of a vaguely UK accent when he raps, it was still seen as part of the American thing by most, British people who became aware of him. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, why has Sheridan stopped his work on Psychopathy? Because everything has seasons, right? And he's an individual that's interested in many different things and different subjects. He doesn't want to get stuck on one thing or get pigeonholed by people. Selwyn says, who is Tyson Fury? Luke Partridge. Ace says, I only heard of Rick when he was going to be deported. Yeah, so some background on Slick Rick. He was born in London and grew up as a young kid in Wimbledon, which still today is kind of a nice part of London, and it certainly was back then. But then he moved with his family to New York City. This must have been in maybe the 70s, I would guess. Maybe early 80s, he moved to New York City. And I guess he had family over there. Slick Rick is of Jamaican descent, right? Jamaican family. So moved over to New York City. And he said he was like a fish out of water instantly, because it was so rough in New York City compared to Wimbledon, where he was coming from. Everything was rough. People were taking a mick out of his accent, so on and so forth. But anyway, he eventually acclimatized to life in the Bronx. That's where he was based, in New York City, as a kid when he grew up. After, he and his family moved there. Got acclimatized to the Bronx. Developed this Slick Rick character, which was kind of like a WWE, because people were making fun of him for being British and having a British accent, he leaned into the Britishness, started calling himself a king, wearing a crown, and talking down to the locals, calling them peasants and stuff like that. So he was leaning into the whole, I'm a king and I'm above you guys, and okay, you're gonna call me posh. I'll play that, right? I'll run with that, like Lord Regal in the WWE, that kind of thing. So anyway, he gained notoriety as a rapper with a beatboxer called Dougie Fresh. This was late 80s. And his first album, The Great Adventures of Slick Rick, was like an instant classic. He was a great storyteller. And I can't remember if he released another album before he went to prison, but he ended up shooting his cousin. And it's not as ratchet and ignorant as you might think when you first hear the fact he went to prison for shooting his cousin. His cousin was a sadistic, twisted individual. His cousin was also a nonce. So his cousin was going around robbing people. And one of the people he robbed, he nonced the person's child during the robbery, right? And Slick Rick ended up in some kind of beef with his cousin. And the cousin basically threatened to do to him what he'd done to other people. And Slick Rick had kids. So he was like, okay, I'm going to get my cousin before he gets me and before he can harm anybody in my family. And so that's how he ended up shooting his cousin. And he was convicted. His cousin didn't pass away, but he was, maybe his cousin had a drug issue. I'm not sure. But yeah, his cousin survived the shooting, but would later go on to be killed by somebody else. But Slick Rick did several years in a penitentiary, and he actually released albums from the penitentiary. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of rappers that do that these days, right? But back then it was a very unheard of thing for a rapper to be releasing albums from the pen. But Slick Rick did that. When he came out, there was a little bit of buzz for his first album back out of pen, but that buzz didn't last that long, and he kind of faded away into obscurity. I guess he's been surviving doing tours around the world and what have you. Exactamundo says, why does he wear the eye patch? He wears the eye patch because he's got a damaged eye. I'm not sure if his eye has been... I don't think his damaged eye is removed. He's just blind, but he's blind in one eye. And that was from an accident as a kid when he was still in the UK, where some glass smashed, or somehow glass got in his eye, and he rubbed his eye and it damaged his eye. And he was like, as I say, blind in one eye from that moment forward as a little kid. And that's why he wears the eye patch, because his eye is like gammy. You know, if you ever see the blind eye, it looks unsightly. And last I checked, or last I can remember, he didn't actually have the eye removed. It's still there. It just doesn't work. It's not functioning. Ben Odom says, remember in the late 90s listening to Black Twang in my dorm room? Yeah, Black Twang was one of the people holding it down for UK hip-hop for the longest time. His first album was called... I think his first album was called Detwork Southeast. Or was that just the name of a track? No, I'm pretty sure his first album was called Detwork, unless it was an EP. Detwork Southeast. His second album... God, what was his second album called? His second album had Shush on there. Actually, Detwork Southeast I don't think was ever released. I think there was like bootleg versions of it, but I don't think it ever got an official release. But his second album, I can't remember what the name of the album was. But he had tracks on there like Shush. Red Letters was on there. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, aside from Africa, which countries do you want to visit? The Philippines. I'd like to visit the Philippines. Thank you, Ben Odom. That's right, 19 long time. There you go. I think there was actually a track on there also called 19 long time. The title track. Did they ever watch Bow Selector? I saw it once or twice. I never thought he was that funny. You know, Keith Lemon's weird guy. It was a bit off key for me. Joe says, I'm visiting Costa Rica next year. Tamarindo. Pura vida. Make sure you visit before the rainy season starts. Exactamundo says Partridge would make a great Bow Selector character. Ace says the White fight might not happen. Heard White got busted for peds. I hope you're trolling. If he gets busted for peds again, he needs to be banned from boxing for good, never to return. Why the Philippines? Because it has some of the most beautiful, unspoiled islands and beaches and stuff like that. You can go island hopping, which is something I want to do. Go to the uninhabited islands and all that. The Philippines is basically like Thailand before Thailand became touristy. Yeah? There was a time back in the 80s and maybe some of the 90s where Thailand wasn't anywhere near as touristy as it is now. It was far more unspoiled. And yeah, the Philippines, as I understand it, is just less spoiled. I mean, there are touristy areas in the Philippines, but because it's so big and it's a massive archipelago of islands, you can go on these like island hopping tours and it's very impressive. Paul McAllister says the Philippines have no running water though. I'm sure there's running water in the Philippines. I mean, yeah, it's a third world country, so some places won't have running water, but other places will. Danny says, won't you need to learn Tagalog? Maybe in some parts, but Filipinos were obviously, is it right to say colonized by the Americans? They certainly speak English, and they speak it with an American accent. Many of them anyway, the more educated ones. Because when you go to the Middle East, there are loads of like Filipino workers out there, and they all speak perfect, or the vast majority of them speak perfect English in a kind of an American sounding type accent. As Sean McNally says, I have a friend that lives in the Philippines. He moved there after high school and never came back. Period. It's been 30 years. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. He's found his little slice of paradise, and why leave, you know? Samil says, Hatman, what is the hospitals like in Costa Rica? Pretty good. Healthcare in Costa Rica is pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty good. The standard of, a lot of people actually come here to get their, you know, a little bit like Turkey, get their teeth done, but get medical procedures and stuff like that. Yeah, the medical care in Costa Rica is pretty good. It's pretty good. Ryan Emus says, Martin Piccoli said he's got a fight lined up in December. Who do you think it is? Zhang would be a good fight. Well, according to Billy Nelson, they're being lined up to fight Itauma if Itauma gets through Dillian White. So it could potentially be Itauma in December. We shall see. It depends on how Itauma gets on, if he even beats Dillian White, or how good he looks. Paul McAllister says Costa Rica has loads of spiders, doesn't it? Well, in the jungle, but spiders are not really a thing that I come across that much, to be honest. Giant centipedes. Centipedes and millipedes, yeah, you see a lot of those. Lizards, iguanas, the mosquitoes, but spiders, I haven't seen that many. Like, I haven't seen any spiders that I'm aware of that are dangerous or have a load of them. No. In fact, because there are so many things preying on the spiders, you probably see less of them, you know? You'd have to go into the jungle to see tarantulas and stuff like that. And there are deadly snakes too, but I've never seen a snake here. Okay, you'd have to go into the jungle. Crocodiles, now those I have seen. Oh yeah. Crocodiles, you will see those. So, you know, proceed accordingly. There are crocs about. Chief Wiggum says, what's Cuba like for healthcare? Well, I've never been to Cuba, but I imagine the healthcare there is pretty terrible. I imagine it's pretty terrible. Maybe I'm wrong, but that'll be my guess. Mr. Lucas says Zhang would knock Bakoli's block off. I'll be interested to see that fight. W says if the white that fought Tete shows up against Itauma, he's going to get badly hurt. I have to completely agree. But he looks a lot, I mean, looks can be deceiving, particularly with these heavyweights. They catfish us all the time. But he looks a lot lighter and more in shape from the interviews I've seen of him recently than he did for the Tete fight. So presumably he's training a lot harder. Ace says the UK have adders. Yes. I've seen one adder in the UK in my entire life. So although they're there, you know, they I want to say most people in Britain have never actually seen one in real life. I saw one once. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, would you visit Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina? I don't have any desire to visit any of those countries. Nothing against the countries, but just don't have any desire to visit those places. Peru, maybe. Because of the ancient sites they have there. I'm interested in ancient sites. But Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, no. And he says, I thought you would have liked Colombia. Why? For what? What's there for me in Colombia? I've got a Partridge fanboy upset here. I should change the title to Partridge rather than Fury because it upsets them even more. Ben Odom says, I respect White for seizing, the payday. Bank of Saudi is decreasing its rates. Shout out to Jonts. I think that's how you pronounce the name. Did they ever watch Alan Partridge? Yeah, Alan Partridge was funny. There was Knowing Me, Knowing You, and then there was that Alan Partridge show thing. Yeah, Alan Partridge was funny. One of Steve Coogan's most famous characters. Kitagata says, racism is everywhere, but Asia can be rife. I have experienced it myself. I'm not particularly bothered by stuff like that. You know, unless somebody's putting hands on me or doing something really egregious. It just washes off my back, bro. I'm like twice the size of the average Filipino. What are they gonna do? Like, you know what I mean? Nobody's gonna try me. No little 5'4" Filipino's gonna try me. So whatever, man. They'll just whisper in their language under their breath if they got anything negative to say. I don't care about that, bro. Danny says, have you experienced racism in Latin America? Well, bear in mind, I don't speak Spanish, so you never know what people are saying about you when you don't speak the language. But no, I've never experienced anything overt. But it's not something I really go looking for. You know, some people are really like looking for it. I just move around normally. It's not really on my mind too tough. Unless something like really egregious were to happen, then I'd be like, that's a bit off. But I don't focus on it, you know? Because the majority of people, in my experience, in the majority of countries are cool. You're not going to run across if there is racism, it's going to be a minority of people who are going to be racist enough to make an issue of it. You see what I'm saying? So not something I really walk about thinking of. Danny says, what about subtle things like not being served first in restaurants? Again, I've never noticed that. If it has happened, I just haven't been paying attention enough to really notice it. So, in fact, the only time that happened is a place I've never been back to. There was a pizza restaurant where it's like they didn't want to serve me or something. But I don't know whether that was like a race thing or whether it was some other issue because of the fact that I wanted to sit somewhere else and this guy didn't want me to sit there. And I don't know what that was all about, because you can get funny stuff anywhere. Do you know what I mean? But this is not something I focus on, bro. Jupiter's String says Filipino food ain't it. Okay, tell me about Filipino food. Whereabouts in the Philippines have you been? Or have you eaten Filipino food outside the Philippines? Yeah, Costa Ricans are very friendly. In fact, this one thing I will tell you about Costa Rica. If, let's say, you're a black person, you're far more likely, if you're going to experience racism in Costa Rica, you're far more likely to experience it from people who are not Costa Rican. You're far more likely to experience it, for example, from Argentinians. There's a lot of Argentinians in Costa Rica. Yeah, they are. If someone's going to be, funny with you because of your skin color, it will far more likely come from like an Argentinian or somebody like that rather than a Costa Rican. It's very, very unlikely it will come from a Costa Rican. Costa Ricans are friendly and they're non-confrontational. And they generally don't have any funky, weird attitudes about them, And Danny says, Argentinian workers or tourists? Both. Dominic K says, what have Argentinians got against blacks? Well, they've got a long history of, deep racism and apparently Nazis, ex-Nazi communities and stuff over there. And yeah. So, the majority of Argentinians are pretty much indistinguishable from like Italians. I think a lot of them are actually from Italian stock. So a very large percentage of Argentinians are like indistinguishable from people from Southern Europe, particularly places like Italy. Whereas with Costa Ricans, yeah, you do get some of them, especially in certain parts of the country, that have got more European genetic lineage. But certainly in Guanacaste, a very large percentage of Costa Ricans have got a lot of indigenous DNA in them. They don't look European at all. Most of the Costa Ricans around here, they look more indigenous than European phenotypically. Shout out to Philip for the super chat. He says, from Crawford's training footage, it looks like he's going to try and employ a body attack. How do you see that working against Canelo? I think that a guy like Crawford is going to train for every eventuality. He's going to train to throw body shots, head shots. He's going to train to move. He's going to train to stand and trade. He's going to train orthodox. He's going to train southpaw. I think Crawford always has a comprehensive approach. He's also going to do plenty of wrestling in his training. So I wouldn't buy too much into little clips of what he's doing in training and think, okay, I've figured out what his game plan is going to be against Canelo. Because he's a very versatile fighter, Crawford. And like I say, I think he trains for every eventuality. I'd be surprised to see him in there up close long enough to implement a concerted body offensive. I'd be surprised. Maybe he'll surprise me, Jupiter's String says, I had a girlfriend from the Philippines and she would always put sugar in everything. It was tasty but big issue with diabetes and obesity over there because of the diet. Okay, I see what you're saying. Well, it's only going to be a holiday for me. I'm not planning to live in the Philippines, so, a couple of weeks of sugary food, I'm sure I'll be okay. I'm sure I'll be okay. I've seen the Coca-Cola I've seen the Filipino Coca-Cola chicken and all this other sugary stuff that they do. It's like a lot of the Chinese food that they sell in Chinese takeaways is sugary, sweet and sour chicken and all that. Jupiter's String says, one of my friends came back from a 2-year sabbatical. He traveled to over 60 countries and he said Costa Rica was his favorite place. So what I'll say about Costa Rica is that it's very tourist friendly. How can I even describe it? It's gringo friendly, to use the Spanish term, but it's not manicured for gringos. And I think that's one of the things that appeals to people about it. Because when you go to a lot of like Caribbean countries, be it Barbados, the Dominican Republic, the beachfronts are all manicured, They've got these big hotel complexes and all that kind of business, and all the infrastructure around them is very manicured and artificial looking. Whereas they have a different approach in Costa Rica. There are a lot of hotels, of course, but independent hotels, not many hotel chains. And the independent hotels and Airbnbs and stuff like that are built to blend in with the local houses and all the local stuff. So even the touristy areas have a certain charm about them. They don't look like a cookie cutter tourist area from a Caribbean country. Does that make sense? So there's still that kind of charm to the place. The roads, certainly around here, are terrible. And when I say terrible, I mean there's no tarmac on most of the roads here, big potholes and stuff like that. the cars here are like fitted with extra springy suspension, it would seem, to deal with the horrendous roads. But that's all part of the charm of it, you know? That it isn't all prim and proper and tarmacked roads everywhere. You know, no road names and what have you. So, a lot of people like that kind of thing. A lot of surfers and bohemian types come to Costa Rica. It's got a very, very laid-back vibe. The people are very laid back. You know? The people are very laid back and chill and pura vida and all that stuff. So, yeah, it's got a charm about it, definitely. Costa Rica's got a charm about it. A shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says Colombia would be great B-roll footage on the DJI. There's so many places to get great footage, you know. Colombia doesn't really appeal to me, truth be told. It's a much bigger country, larger population, and it's kind of like turned into ground zero for American passport bros. That's what Colombia's turned into. And because it's ground zero for American passport, I mean, I'm not really into Colombian chicks like that and Brazilian chicks. I mean, I like African girls, you know. But some people feel like Latino girls are the top tier. It's, you know, everyone's got different taste. And that's pretty much what everyone goes. I don't know, I don't want to say everyone, but a lot of people go to Colombia for. And because it's become known for that, you're going to get more and more and more criminal gangs in Colombia targeting passport bros. It's inevitable because it's become so swamped with passport bros. Yeah. Scams and attacks on those kind of people are going to rise. So really the smart thing to do is to go to a place where there isn't really a big passport bro community or culture. Star Fox says passport hoes, not bros. Nah, there's no such thing as a male hoe. Passport hoes would be females traveling overseas to get their back blown out. I guess they'll go to somewhere like Gambia or Caribbean, you know, like middle-aged women. That's what I would call passport hoes. Or even like younger females who used to go to like Ayia Napa and Ibiza. You call them passport hoes? There's no such thing as a male hoe. That's right, Mully. Gambia is a hotspot for the passport hoes. Yes. That's where middle-aged women go to get their back blown out by a 25-year-old guy. Gambia's been known for that for a long time. Gambia's been known for that for a long time. I mean, even the Caribbean, you know, Jamaica and various other Caribbean countries were known for that as well. But I want to say it's more common in Gambia because Gambia's closer to places like Britain, you know, easier to get to, cheaper than going all the way to Jamaica. Anthony YouTube says, why Gambia of all places? I'm guessing because it's still, or maybe because of the visa thing and whatever, you know, former British colony, a very small country. I don't know. But yeah, they've been doing that for a long time. Going these middle-aged women from Europe going to Gambia to get the back blown out by 25-year-olds. And I'm talking about like 60-year-old women. Women in their 50s and 60s. Yeah, look it up on YouTube. You'll see it. You just look up like sex tourism Gambia and you'll see all these like middle-aged women from Europe going there. LUFC says Gambian men must have strange tastes. No, not really. It's just that they're impoverished. You know, the ones who do that stuff, they got no money. So because they're broke, you know, they hang around these touristy areas and they try and chat up like middle-aged European women who are there for that reason. So it doesn't take much chatting up. And, you know, they're willing to pipe down these old bags to get a few quid. Basically, that's what it is. Yeah. Shout out to Danny, who says, do you think Colombian girls are flaky? Nowhere near as flaky as girls in the West. Definitely not. Well, once you leave the West, flake rates plummet when it comes to dating. In the West, certainly in places like London, oh my gosh. The United States, flake rates are extremely high. But once you leave these areas of, you know, these particular like major metropolitan areas in the West, and certainly when you get outside the West altogether, flake rates are far, far lower. Shout out to Dr. Wu Doc. Tosserman says, why don't the old women and young incel guys just get together so they all don't have to spend money going overseas? Sometimes you do see young incels with old women, because what young man would want an old woman? Better to spend a few quid and go overseas and be with like a woman in her prime. Why would you stay in the West and get with an old bag? That's no fun. That's no fun at all. That is reserved only for the most impoverished men on the planet. Yeah? In certain parts of Africa, right? The poorest guys in Africa, they will lower themselves to that extent to make a few quid, because there's no way out. But, you know, the incels, as you call them, well, they've got enough money in a lot of cases to holiday overseas. And, you know, when they're overseas, get girls in their 20s. So it's preferable to getting in a relationship with a 60-year-old woman. Imagine you're 25. Why would you want to be, like, no 25-year-old incel in America or in the UK would want to get into a relationship with a 65-year-old woman. Nobody wants to do that. Your life might be hard, but it's not hard enough to push you to that extent in the UK, you know? Mora's man says, if you're going to spend lots of money specifically to get laid, you could do it here. It doesn't have to be an old bag. There's more to women overseas than just, you know, getting laid. You can go see a brass in London. Somebody who's literally slept with thousands of men. I've never understood the appeal of brasses. I just don't get it. Like a woman who's literally slept with thousands of men, her whole energy is so off. I've never understood the appeal of brasses at all. I would never sleep with a brass. It's just, I know people who have done it, but for me, it's not my thing, bro. I'll sleep with a brass. Someone who's literally slept with thousands of dudes. It's weird. Danny says, have you ever rented an ATV in Costa Rica and traveled around? Traveled around in an ATV? No. Never traveled around in an ATV. ATVs are something you rent for a few hours. You know, it's not something you would rent and then travel around on. Especially if you're a gringo. You know, the police are looking for any reason to pull you over if they see you out somewhere out of place. Mura's man says, I don't either, but better than a 60-year-old for an incel all day. But what's better than either of those things is just for the incel to go overseas. That's better than both. Because it's not just that you can get girls more easily overseas, it's that the girls are of a higher quality, a higher standard than the majority of girls you get in the West anyway. Up front, you get femininity. You don't get some weird masculine energy and tone, depending on the country, because some countries, they do get a load of tattoos, but in many other countries, no tattoos, feminine voice, feminine energy, and even if she's just looking for you to spend money, you at least get femininity out of her. Do you know what I mean? Dating girls in London, there's no femininity. I mean, there's none. Literally none. You get masculine energy, a contentious tone in the way they talk, a contemptuous attitude. It's just not, it's horrible. It's horrible. Yeah, exactly as Kitagata said there. Girls saying bruv. I mean, fist bump, indie, all that stuff. Girls saying bruv and all the tattoos and oh my God, bro. No, thank you. Girls calling each other bruv. It's just nasty, man. It's just nasty. Josh says nothing worse than a contemptuous tone. And they all pretty much have that. Mark Birdle says, do you think black women have more masculine energy in the West? Yes. In Africa, no. In most parts of Africa, not at all. Most parts of Africa, they have a very feminine energy. But for some reason in the West, it's like, particularly in the cities like London, it's just masculinity is the norm, is the standard, you know? And it isn't just black women, by the way. Maybe they're the most masculine in places like London, but even other races of women in London, bro. There's not much femininity there at all. Certainly not in the, working class areas, right? Mark Hatch says the tattoo craze in the West is really insane. Yeah, it is. The tattoo craze, the bull ring in the nose. I hate that bull ring thing, man. That looks disgusting. It looks so disgusting. Christian says, aren't you overgeneralizing? No. I'm not. I wish I was. But I can assure you I'm not. Sometimes people, particularly who are not from London, who are not from one of these big cities, maybe from some small town somewhere or village, they're like, it's not like that around here. Well, yeah, I'm sure it's not, but in London, I can assure you it is. In most of the big cities, it's an absolute disaster. Shout out to Moros Man for the super chat. Yes, get the likes up, guys. What we got? 270 concurrent viewers, 110 likes. We can get it up to like 140 likes, so 30 more. Thank you in advance and big up Moros, man. Mark says women don't realize that their money or status doesn't matter to men. Well, women in general don't have as much self-awareness as men do. Yeah, women in general are not as self-aware as men are. And the reason for this is because men are the ones who approach, right? Men are the ones who generally pursue and approach, which makes women feel like they are the prize. And if they're always getting approached and they're always feeling like they're the prize, then they're not really going to think about what men like, if that makes sense. I mean, they know a certain amount of things that men like, and they're going to cater to that to some extent. But all the tattoos and the bull ring piercings, and all, most men don't like all that stuff. But since these women get that much attention every day, especially in this social media age with Instagram and dating apps, there are so many like desperate guys who'll chat to them anyway, even if they don't like the tattoos and the nose piercing and don't like all that stuff, they'll still chat to them anyway and give them all the compliments in the world. So, long story short, these women are never told, most of them are never told about themselves. They're never critiqued. Whereas men are critiqued all the time. Because men are critiqued all the time and men get rejected all the time in the dating market, men have to be more self-aware, right? You have to make sure that everything's on point when you go out there, because you know you're being scrutinized and critiqued all the time because you're getting rejected all the time. So it's a different psychological dynamic. Most women, especially in this day and age, are far less self-aware than men are. And that's why they have like an overinflated sense of self-worth and all that kind of thing compared to men. Because they're not the ones doing the pursuing, they're not the ones getting rejected and so on and so forth. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, would you go to Brazil? Beautiful beaches. Brazil's never really appealed to me, to be honest. It's never really appealed to me. Yeah, they got beaches, but you'd have to go way, way, way outside of the cities to, you know, really enjoy the beaches, because I wouldn't want to be on a beach in Rio. It's like crowded with people and that's not my thing. I like a laid-back vibe. I don't like to go to the places where everybody else is. So Brazil doesn't really appeal to me. Plus, Brazil is very dangerous. And I'm not really a fan of Portuguese. I don't like the way the Portuguese language sounds. I like Spanish, but I don't know, Portuguese sounds weird. I know it's similar to Spanish, but it just sounds weird. Never really liked Portuguese. LD says it sounds Russian. Yeah, it sounds vaguely Eastern European, doesn't it, somehow? It's just not a very nice language on the ears. It's a weird sound to Portuguese. Ocean Blue says, me neither. Find Portuguese very off-putting. Exactamundo says, I've spent a couple of years learning Spanish. Portuguese, despite being similar, goes right over me. Linkage says, I prefer Portuguese in Portugal than the Brazilian version. I've just never liked any version of it. Brazilian Portuguese, proper Portuguese, Angolan Portuguese, Mozambique Portuguese. I just don't like that language. Kieran says, me and you both, Hatman, Portuguese sounds very masculine on a woman, and that's very off-putting. All right, peeps, going to shut this one down. I'd like to shout out to each and every one of you for joining the conversation. It's going to blast as always. Special shout out to those who donated via Super Chat. They were Mr. Luca, Danny, Ibrahim, President Brush, George the Last Patriot, Dan the Man, Mr. Luca, Paul McAllister, Tony Britton, Bobs, Matthew Wilson, The Sweet Maths, Agni. Is there anybody else there? Phil. Shout out to Phil. McCracken, Murrah's Man, and Danny again. So big up everyone who donated via Super Chat. Until next time, take care, be good. Catch you guys on the other side. I'm out. I always forget, Rastafari. That's right, Rastafari.